Hi everybody, my name is Erkki Karo and I'm in charge or leading the governance stream of our Finest Twins Center for Smart Cities. And today I will give you a brief overview of how we think about governance of smart cities from research perspective. What are the important topics? What are the important trends in this area of research? And then I will also discuss how scientists would like to probably collaborate with cities, civil servants, politicians from the cities to improve our own research in terms of excellence, but also to offer valuable insights, lessons, improvements to the everyday practice of city management. If you look at last 4 or 5 years of discussions, keywords in smart city debates, from the governance perspective, then one could even say that almost nobody talks anymore about smart cities alone. But we see more and more new concepts, new challenges being linked to the debates on smart cities. So maybe one of the most common, most understandable is smart cities that are also economically competitive, whether it's economic development in general of cities, well-being of citizens, or it's actually attracting talent. So how do you make cities smarter for one of the main purposes of attracting talent? But if you look now into more recent debates, we see more and more keywords, more and more challenges being linked to this issue. So we talk about smart and sustainable cities, increasingly also smart and citizen-oriented cities. And especially after the current COVID crisis, we also talk about resilience of cities. And if you think about all of these elements, then it's a lot. It's a lot to put into one research area. It's a lot to put into actually one policy action, if you can call development of smart cities a policy action. But nevertheless, one would argue that these are all important facets of smart city debates today, both in theory and in practice. And this is actually what we should all be dealing with when we talk about governance of smart cities, whether it's academia or it's the civil servants or the managers of cities. But then this is an issue. How do you actually deal with these things all together? And we can even think about smart cities almost as a wicked issue. And wicked issues, at least in governance research, are things that we don't fully understand. So the definition of wicked problems is that we don't actually know what is a problem. Hence, it's very difficult to find a solution as well. But what I mean with the question of is smart city a wicked issue is that we don't have answers at the moment for how to combine these different elements that I discussed before into a common framework, into a common action plan or a common strategy. So one of the big debates we could have is kind of what is a balance between technology-driven and people-driven developments in cities. So we can even talk about not any more smart cities, because that could also almost look like a maximization function. Can we get more and more technology? Can we get more and more innovation in cities? But we start talking about smart enough cities, which means that there is somewhere a limit of how much people can actually go along with the change, how much people want to be kind of test beds, pilot areas for new developments, and how much people actually want comfort, stability in their lives as well. And the second kind of area that makes smart city topics a wicked thing is that almost a question of where are the boundaries or limits of cities and what are cities accountable for. So one of the main trends in smart city, one of the main reasons why the smart city topic has become so popular globally is urbanization. More and more people moving into cities, and hence there is the argument that we need to improve the cities, make them smarter, make them better. But if you look at it in the bigger picture and take into account sustainability, citizen-orientedness, resilience, then there might be always a downside. And the question then becomes, where are the limits for cities or accountabilities of the cities? And what I mean by that is that what should actually cities take into account when they design the strategies, when they design their smart city roadmaps? Should we also, as a city, as a main driver of urbanization, as a main place where people want to move, should we as a city take into account also our socioeconomic impacts? Smarter people moving to the cities, more finance going to the cities, more innovation opportunities emerging in cities. But what about the negative impacts in the periphery of the countries where the cities are located, and so forth. So you can think about questions of what about labor, what about employment in the countryside. If we are a city that we drive new innovations in food sector, what is the impact of this on the employment, on the stability in the countryside? Should we take this into account or not? Second question clearly becomes the environmental footprint of cities globally. That if we try to make cities smarter by just adopting new technologies, fixing our local problems with new technologies, are we taking into account the material footprint of our technologies, the impact we have on less developed countries from where many of the natural resources might be extracted, and so forth. And the last question, I guess, those who have followed recent political turmoil in US or even before that also in Europe, the last question clearly is the question of technological sovereignty of cities and countries and regions. As a city, should we actually have our own technology policy to some extent? Should we think about what kind of technologies we procure, with whom do we collaborate? Do we actually become parts of kind of geopolitics as well of countries and regions, that we don't just pick the best technologies for our problems, but we also think about the broader geopolitical implications as well. And if you think about all of these problems, then, I mean, as I said, it becomes a lot. It becomes quite difficult to figure out, so what to do. And a wicked issue is kind of a thing that by definition almost leads people to not deal with that. And it's oftentimes very easy, very simple to kind of say that, okay, we cannot deal with all of the world problems. We pick one thing that is important for us. But I think this might be a wrong way out of these things. I think we should, when we talk about governance of smart cities, have this kind of broader perspective in there, because technology is by now political, which means that smart city is a political project by now, and we need to take into account different values, different perspectives there. And I have here two quotes. One says that, if you're smart, don't do it, what I just said. The other one says that if you do it, then don't have too high expectations, because as by definition, you don't so much solve a wicked problem or a wicked issue as you help stakeholders negotiate shared understanding and shared meaning about the problem and its possible solutions. So what I mean is that governance research almost never finds perfect answers, right answers to these questions. It gives us a general common understanding, and it tries to help find better solutions, not the best solution, not the best approach, but better. And I think this is something that we realistically need to take into account. So going back now to our Finest Twins project, so how do we actually try to do this? How we as researchers try to contribute to this kind of large-scale challenges and ambitions? Well, one way is to look at it from a classic social science perspective. And this is something that many smart city centers of research oftentimes do, which is to do kind of grand comparisons, try to build certain paradigms or models of smart city governance. But our intention here is to actually go into much more kind of granular developments, and not just talk about what types of smart city developments there are. In some countries, states are in the leadership. In others, it's the private sector that gives the initiatives. In some other places, and in most cases, we want to have people at the center of these developments. Instead of just limiting ourselves to this kind of large comparisons, large analysis, we try to take a more pragmatic approach as well and think about how to transition actually towards people-led smart and sustainable cities. So not the question of what is a smart city, what are the grand typologies, but how to create better smart cities in that sense. And this is something that we normally do as social scientists anyway. But the second side is also that we focus on what I call collaborative and participatory research with cities on what may work here and now. So if you think about Finest Twins, what would actually work for Helsinki and Tallinn if you look at global developments, global best practices? And we can look at this on three different layers to large extent: strategy, policy, and delivery. And we can have there different research questions that are much more pragmatic. And here is, as my last point, an important element, which is also kind of a characteristic of the Finest Twins project or initiative, is that this side of the research questions we often try to do through piloting for smart and sustainable governance in cities. And what I mean by piloting is that it's not so much a traditional way of doing research that we look at global picture, try to get some generalizations, and then derive best practices from global trends. Rather, what we would want to do is to actually work with cities, trying to test whether different models, different approaches, different ideas work in a real-life setting here and now. And for this, I think there are three things that are really needed for this collaboration between cities and science to work better. First of all, we as scientists need to get out of our currently home offices and academic bubbles and tackle really this kind of wicked issues and try to say that we need to work on this and try to show a direction where to go on this. And the second side is that I think cities need to trust scientists more and take them as collaborators in the research. So it's not a kind of a customer and service provider relationship that we give you right answers. No, it can only be that we are your partners and we help cities to figure out what might work or what might not. And the last thing is that the cities themselves need to rethink many of their existing routines. Although we write 10 or 15-year strategies, are we willing to accept that things might actually expire in 1 or 2 years? And are we then willing to start rethinking these processes? And in many cases, we see that these developments actually become much more evolutionary, much more dynamic. And for this, we need to kind of change the mindset from both of our sides. It's the academia as well as the city administrators. And this is briefly where I finish my talk. Thank you for the attention and see you somewhere in a smarter city.